right away. So if we take every single closing wheel available on the market and we look at those three facets, the brake, the marry, and the firming, okay? And if I was to take that wheel and I was to actually press it in there, you know, hand by hand and see what it does, and if I was to rate 0 to 5, 5 being good, let's take a rubber wheel, for instance. A rubber wheel, imagine if you were actually pressing that through a sidewall right there, what would you see? All right, you're gonna see simply force pushing that, okay? There's no braking action with that, okay? It's only going to push. So a smooth, well, any smooth wheel, smooth rubber wheel, smooth cast wheel, if I was gonna rate 0 to 5 on the braking action, I'm gonna say it's a 0. The only way that we brake and create loose soil with that is more and more and more force, which then obviously is gonna be the firming action. And so a smooth wheel is going to be a 5 on firming, okay? Now the marrying, the second point of that, or the second facet, that will depend a little bit on the design of the wheel or the tooth or anything, but also the distance that they are away and maybe even angle there. But when we look at something like the twister closing wheel, that's what the design of the twister, that's what we had in mind when we did that, was we wanted to make sure that it would penetrate and it would break. So we can go back and we can look at some of our other spike closing wheels. There's one over there on Pete's outdated display stand. Pete, it's good that we show what we used to do. On the left, there's a cast spike wheel that has a diamond shape to it. That wheel was designed back in the 90s, actually. And what we didn't know, we didn't know. But that wheel, what we did know is a smooth wheel is really good at firming. And so we wanted to design a wheel that was the opposite. That was really good at braking. It wasn't until we did that after years and years that we started realizing it's not really giving us this very good firming action. So that's what led us to designing different teeth. And the twister closing wheel today, the reason why it is so successful on millions of rows is because of the exact design of the tooth. We want to make sure that tooth, first of all, will penetrate and break. Check. We want to make sure that the wheel has the ability to marry the two sides together. Now, I can change that. You know, if somebody in here said, all right, well, Andy, I put mine 2 inches apart and they didn't do much. Yeah, you're right, because they're going to be doing all the action out here. So we're not marrying it. So the distance certainly can be changed change how that marries, but it does a good job of marrying. And then the firming action that you get with that design of the tooth. If you put this in the sidewalls and you look at it, you will notice that the twister wheel is going to firm much differently than what that cast spike wheel is going to do over there. It's going to do much different than what a smooth wheel does. So that's back to your question there. Absolutely, the wheel, the design of the wheel is going to make a difference on that. Well, that can vary a little bit. I mean, but we're gonna tell you 1 3/8 inches, but that ties directly into your question about seed depth. Okay. Now, if still the very inside of the teeth. Yep. The teeth itself, the very inside point. Yep. 1 3/8 inches. Yep. Exactly. That is assuming basically 2 inches of depth or around thereabouts. Now, if somebody in here says, in my experience, I swear that I need to be planting 3 inches deep, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. There are some instances where we would suggest that planting deeper is going to be a good thing. So I'm a little bit flexible, I guess I would say, on what I believe the right depth is, but too shallow, we definitely know is problems. Too deep, I feel like we can change that in the performance of our closing and some of our adjustments and our condition. So I mentioned earlier that if I'm planting and it's 48 degrees soil temp and it's warming and it's drying, I'm going to put a lot of pressure on these to firm. I got to break, I got to marry, but then I'm going to put a lot of pressure on this to firm. The reason why is because I don't want that to get air infiltrated in there too soon and thus start to emerge that, some of those seeds too quickly. we've got warmth, we've got, warm and drying coming from, Mother Nature with the higher temperatures and, the wind. So what we need to do is make sure that we do this evenly and consistently. So the more pressure that I put on that, the longer and more consistent it's going to take to warm that up to get to the seed to germinate. So, and back to your question on the depth, I will vary my depth a little bit depending on what my conditions are. I want to make sure that I'm planting into moisture. I want to make sure that I'm getting consistency. And, planting 3 inches deep, we can typically, with our planters, we can be more consistent, which is why a lot of people will plant deeper, because it's easier to get consistency at 3 inches than it is, at 1.5 inches. So I will maybe, deepen that up a little bit depending on what my conditions are. I certainly believe in, my experience, especially when I'm no-tilling and my strip till that I'm doing, I have no problems 2.5. I mean, 2 inches is my minimum depth, but I really would a lot of times favor 2.25 or 2.5.
What about on beans?
On beans.
That's what you're talking about, beans?
No, that's corn. Nope, I'm talking about corn. Beans. What are we planting? What you asked the question, what are you planting your beans at?
2 inches.
2 inches? Anybody else? Same as the corn. Okay, and what'd you say?
1.5 minimum.
1.5 minimum, okay. Anybody shallower?
Your moisture point. If you plant beans after corn, the last 2 years it's getting dry.
Yep,
So
yep.
now you're going deep.
So I mentioned, say, 48 degrees. I mentioned that example right here in warming and drying. I actually, sometimes when we're planting beans on April 1st, when we're planting beans early, and I know this goes against conventional wisdom, but I actually, depending on my conditions, I sometimes will plant them deeper. And the reason why is because if I'm planting on April 1st, I'm in Illinois, but I'm basically southern Iowa, the Iowa-Missouri border. I go straight into Illinois, that's where I'm at. It's quite possible that I can have a frost 3rd week of April. Maybe even probable, April 10th, April 15th. A lot of times we do. So what I have seen is I can plant beans early and they can sit there for a while. And then when it warms up and dries and everything and they come up, recent history has shown me that that's given me the best potential for my highest yields, getting them beans out there and getting them in the ground. But I got to do it consistently. So I had some issues where if we're planting too shallow and it starts to warm up that 1st week of April, actually I'm getting some beans out of the ground pretty dang quick. If I'm only out there planting 1.5 inches deep and some of them beans come up, but not all of it, because of moisture conditions or variances in soil type in the field, I'm getting some of them beans up and then they get frosted off. Now it really sucks when I'm out there, looking at some of the frosted off beans, because obviously, we got to take it a few days to see how many of them die. And then we got some more still trying to come up. And then when I got to make that painful decision of spot in or not, and then I got to look at that the rest of the year. I got the holes out there where it came up and got frosted off, and I thought that they were going to be okay. They were still coming. So I don't put myself in that position. I plant a little bit deeper. Plant a little bit deeper and firming that in there just a little bit more so that we can get it more consistent, our heat. Every 1/2 inch deeper we go, it takes a little bit longer for that to warm up. I love to plant on April 1st. I don't necessarily want my beans up on April 1st or April 5th. I want them to come up, 15th or, something like that, is where they start to come up, but I want them to be consistent.
What depth were you saying?
On beans? What depth on beans you're saying? Yeah. So for me, 1.5 inches is minimum. I think that's what you said. 1.5 inches is minimum. A lot of times I'm 1.5 inches to 2. I don't know if I really would ever go below 2 or 2.25, maybe, as my max depth. But you said same depth as corn, so 2.5.
Not even that deep, probably 2.25.
Yeah.
hopefully right in there.
Yep. 1.5 to 2.25.
I know one thing. Dad said, oh, it doesn't hurt to see a few on top. Don't do that anymore.
I completely agree with that. I do not like that at all, especially when we start talking about lowering our seeding populations. And we have had tremendous success with lowering seeding populations and increasing yields. And I am a big believer in that.
What population are you at?
120, 130. I mean, that's, and even pushing that down. Because as we're getting lower and lower seeding populations, what I feel as though we're seeing is we're seeing less and less disease. We're seeing less and less stress on the plants. Getting healthier plants because they're not trying to outcompete each other. So, if we can place them consistently right there, get them to emerge consistently, now we don't have the variance. We're not competing against, the plants aren't competing as much. They're healthier plants. I think it's pretty well documented. Healthier plants is able to fight off stress, whether that be drought or disease, later on in the year. That's what's helping us.
Last Wednesday meeting up in Waterloo, this guy from Iowa Soybean Association was there. And he said they did all their trials. They didn't see any drop off in yield until they got down to 80,000 plants. He said people were still fighting too thick. So I think that's that issue.
And see, the thing is let's say we go out there, we've heard some examples of I planted 130 or 40, I had some frost or I had some issues or whatever, and my final stand was 80,000 and I got, the same yield or close to the max yield. When we do that and we're losing, in that case, 50,000 plants, that's never 50,000 equally spaced plants, right? We don't take every third one out. No, we're taking out some of these and we're taking out some of these. I remember back in the 90s when I was in college and we were scouting and I'd go out there and throw the hula hoop out on our drilled soybeans, 7-inch spacing, 6-inch spacing, everything like that. What population do we want? 180,000. All right. What do I have? 5 checks. 180,000 on one of them. 130,000 on one of them. 230,000 on one of them. All right. 180,000. Check. That's what I averaged. But some of those were 230 and some of those were 130. And it was all supposed to be at 230. So now we go out there and we try to plant 120,000 and we get 118,000, 117,000. Perfect. That's what I want. We plan on that. It's going to take some different inputs. We'll talk about that, I guess, a little bit here, but it takes some different inputs. We have to set our planner up to be able to do that, but we have the abilities to do that. And when we start talking about ROI, like we're hoping, when we're talking about today, if I plan for that and I put my money into that and that gives me the consistent results, that's return on the investments. Do we answer all those questions, Brett?
I really didn't like doing trials of soybeans. I started doing that just because not many people work, and I didn't want to do more foreign stuff like everyone else was doing. But what I found, I did 3 years of low glycolation trials. All 3 years, I'm on 15-inch rows, mind you, as well. All 3 years, my economic rent, so that best ROI was either 80,000 or 100,000. That's so if you think of 80,000 on 15-inch rows, that's spacing like what you see in corn. So that what I felt is when I've got a planter that can space the beans well, which is tough to do for most machines, and have the right amount of downforce where I get all those beans up, if I can count on that population being well spaced, that was a very easy win. Good, excellent return on investment. I don't have a good answer for the concern of, well, what if I get some frosting off? Like when you're planting 80,000, you don't really have any room to lose much. So I would say, yeah, there's certainly some risk there. I looked with my feed supplier. Well, if I ran into problems, he was going to help me with replant. But I never yet have a failure. It always worked out. I planted early. I planted an early variety too, trying to get flowering before summer solstice, and it paid off every year.
When we start talking about return on investment, predictability sure helps that. It helps that equation. So if I can predict, if I go out there and I plan to plant 80,000 and I can get 80,000 or within our 90, however many percent, if I can get that result, I've planned for it. I've got better spacing. All right. Well, hail. Okay. So I just have a hard time, planning on, well, what if I got hail? I want to make sure that I have extra plants out there. I have a hard time figuring the ROI on that, I guess is what I'll say. I mean, I'm going to plant a bunch of extra seeds every single year, which are going to be a negative effect, just in case that one year that I get hail, that I can say, ha ha, I'm good to go, right? I mean, predictability. Any of those other questions? We got a lot of questions right there.
Come here back. I think probably a lot of us see here versus planters, narrow row planters. I know good that I put a beta planted those rows that run entire track shallower. You will never blend study. You'll study to see if that fall lakes, that makes a difference. Row shallower, what help?
This is why I hate 15-inch rows. It is. I have, in my area of Western Illinois, especially 10, 15 years ago, everybody had 15-inch planters. Everybody had split row planters, 30-inch corn, 15-inch beans. I'm on 20s, 20-inch corn, 20-inch beans, so that I don't have to fight that. We run tram lines, so everything's on 40 foot. So that way we've got it on tracks. That way it's planned exactly where that's going to go, so I don't have to be planting into that, right? Back to the predictability thing. All right, so can I, at what certainty can I predict that planting half-inch shallower there is going to give me the same result? Maybe, maybe not. So it becomes, what's the best of our options? And so what we do know, depth can matter on this, but what we do know, what we have shown is you put all the same emphasis on your soybeans as what we do on corn. It will equal the same results as what it does on corn. And I mentioned I'm on 20-inch rows, and so when we built a 20-inch planter for corn, we put all the technology that we hand-selected the technology that we were going to put on there. And we did this. We've had this planter for 7 years. We put speed tubes on it. We put hydraulic downforce on it. We put air-adjusted row cleaners. We put the twister closing wheels on that. We were doing it for corn. But on the soybeans, it has helped us every bit as much on soybeans as it has on corn. So on 15-inch rows, we're planting into that wheel track, on 4 rows right there. But the residue management, the downforce, the seed trench closing, the better job that we can do all that, I believe as though it minimizes some of that. Now, again, we still have that depth thing, but a lot of times when we take a split row planter and all we do is put a coulter on there, or we put no attachments on there, when we don't change anything from the minimum on that, the residue a lot of times has a vary from where we've driven over it versus where it's fluffier, where we haven't done anything to manage that residue. So it's ultimately the difference, and back to that predictability thing, it's the difference in those conditions on a lot of times why we see the difference. I think depth maybe, certainly has something to do with that, but I don't think it's just the depth. I think it's these other factors.
I would back you up on that, Andy, because I will say that the one question that I get the most surprised look from people on is when they'll ask me about downforce and narrow row cleaner. There is such a thing as a narrow row cleaner, and we found that there's a lot of people that don't realize that there's 2 different ones. Those narrows are meant for the 15 and 20-inch rows. And I'll talk to them and they'll say, well, you do a lot of this for corn, right? No, I saw a cross farm average on the low end of 5 bushel nacre beans by doing the downforce program. That's 50 bucks an acre.
And then on top of that, that gave you the ability to start reducing those rates, those seeding rates. Because in the past, we had to compensate for the trash and for the poor depth control. Now he's got better depth control. He's got better seed placement, better emergence. he can start lowering those rates as well, saving money on seed in addition to the increase in yield.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, everybody goes, seriously? You got more on beans than you tacked on corn? Well, corn should be pretty variable depending upon the growing conditions, right? But when you can see it in the beans and it's consistent, that to me really shows more than anything.
Well, Pete, we put those on last year. And what we noticed with the time when you water, you have standing row covers. And you're covering up the back rows with the front row covers.
Yep.
So they struggle more until you get to the sunlight. It was a no-brainer.
Yeah.
If you're gonna use row cleaners, you're going 15-inch rows.
Yeah.
Yep.
Why throw one part of it on another row?
Right.
Just to flip it back on and play again.
Yep.
And then it starts impacting your gauge yields and your nuts.
So back to this slide right here, what we're talking about is the seed to soil contact, the consistency and everything. That's the same whether we're no-tilling, strip tilling, conventional tillage. Those goals never change. This kind of goes along with what we've been talking about right here, right? But if we're going to no-till and we're going to do, that goal is having the good seed depth, the good placement, everything. We've got to equip our equipment to handle this. So on the planter side, the residue manager, downforce, good opener discs, your gauge wheels adjusted properly, really important. You talk about ROI, that's one right there, that's free. All we got to do is adjust them properly. We're talking about the V-trench earlier, okay? So one of the other things that we're looking at, back to when we stop in between the opener discs and the closing wheels, all right? We want to see the nice firm V right there. Sometimes we'll go to a planter and what we see is this nice firm V, but when you look down in there, you can see dry dirt. That happens most often because our gauge wheels are not scraping the opener discs. That's also another reason for sidewall lift, because when that opener blade is turning and it's pulling up and exiting the soil, we need the gauge wheel, we need the lip of this wheel pressing down right there. Not this far away, but right there, to wipe that clean to make sure it doesn't lift. Because if we have that away, just like if we don't have enough downforce, it'll start to lift that, we lift the sidewalls. Dirt starts falling in. When I start talking about managing our moisture and sealing that up, if I start taking and putting various amounts of dry dirt from up on top down in the seed trench and then I close it up, and I do that 38,000 times, 34,000 times or whatever on every acre for all of our seeds, we're gonna get variance in, and we can do everything else right. But if we get dry dirt down there varying on some seeds, now all of a sudden we're out there doing the flag test and we see that we're getting a variance in our emergence. What did I do wrong? Do I need different row cleaners? No, we need to adjust our gauge wheels in that instance right there. So that's another thing to be looking at, that we don't have dirt falling down there in the seed trench. And then our closing wheels, which we've talked about. All right, so this is a lot of our struggle in no-till, is equipping ourselves to have success. Our goals do not change just because our no-tiller, our pre-planter passes does not change our goal from the planter pass. Concerns with no-till. It's not just easy. We don't just jump into it. It's going to cost the money to do that. Just because we decide to park the tillage machines and we're going to go to no-till to save some money this year, if we want to have success with it, it's going to cost us some money. So we've got to look at that ROI. All right. Now, all of a sudden, Pete here tells us that he's got 5 bushel more on soybeans, and he's telling us that he's saving, if you can save $5 for every 10,000 seeds. So if we can drop our seed population by 30,000, all right, so there's another 15 bucks on top of the 5 bushel, increase that he's got on yield. Now that can give us a pretty dang quick return on our investment to be able to attach, to outfit our planter with the correct attachments to do that. And the good thing is one of the points I said earlier about repetitive ROI. All right, we can pay for that in 1 year, and now year 2, 3, 4, and so on. That's just extra money. fertilizer application. All right, so if we do no tillage on all of our crops, how are we going to fertilize? Put it in the ground? Do we put it on top? Okay, so nonetheless, there's concerns. Maybe we were in the past putting fertilizer on top and tilling it in. All right, so that's a concern. We have to address that. Knowledge and experience is for those challenges. All right, so Pete told me about his no-till and it was working great and everything like that. So then you try it, and then all of a sudden it's really wet, it's really dry. We have some weather extremes or whatever. All right, you have the experience to handle that. Okay, we know what to do. I would know what to do. I mean, I'm going to deepen my planter up. I'm going to change my closing wheels a little bit. All right, for some of these weather things. Understand that's a challenge because we don't have that experience if we haven't been doing it. 2026, one of our concerns was residue. All right, somebody pointed that out. Residue management is 365 days a year. Earlier at lunch, we were talking about, for me in no-till, one of our most positive residue management things is the combine. Starting with the Devastator and the Calmer chopping rolls on our corn head, and then doing nothing else with those corn stalks. Nothing else, and we'll no-till back into those in the springtime. But that's equipping me, that's giving me the tools to be able to handle that residue, to get that residue to break down. We have high yields. I don't have residue problems because we're thinking about it all the time, not just handling it with the planter. So we go to no-till, these are some of the concerns. We got to be thinking about how everything else affects this when we stop doing our tillage. Consistency of the seed bed. I mean, we've talked about, the attachments and everything like that, but we come through there and, that's one concern with no-till is we're drying, we're warming, looking pretty good. I go out there and 80% of the field's ready to go and 20% is too wet. Am I going to plant around the wet holes? No, I'm going to plant through them. All right. Does that, how much of a negative does that create for us? All right. That's some concerns with no-till that we got to be ready to address. And like I said, the hardships from the weather. I mean, and there's others as well, but these are some of them that I come up with. One thing that I talk about a lot is echo. Every challenge creates opportunity. All right. So maybe that sounds good on no-till, but maybe we're not quite ready for those challenges. All right. But it's going to create opportunities for us.
Thank you for joining us today. Be sure to check out our complete Yetter Solutions Sitter playlist at YouTube. And as always, we're here to help you find profitable solutions for your operation. So if you need more information or have a topic idea for a future episode, drop an email to solutions@yetterco.com.